Hey everybody, Joel here at DesignFlow Labs, and in this video I want to talk about a topic that actually comes up quite often working with clients, talking with folks internally, and that topic is tasks. And more specifically, inside of Podio, should you use the native Podio tasks versus a dedicated task application? So I'm sure if you've ventured into the forums, started researching some of this on your own, you've probably found all different points of view. We're going to cover some of those points of view today and give you some actual ideas in the platform as to some different pros and cons and thoughts as to when to use the native Podio tasks versus maybe a dedicated task application. All right, so let's jump out of the gate with the first point, probably the most important point or consideration, when you're trying to decide versus using the built-in tasks versus a task application. The first point is there's really no right or wrong answer. Both ways, have lots of pros. There's some cons here and there depending on what you're trying to do. But there's really no right or wrong answer to this. What this comes down to is it comes down to things like unique business cases. What is it you're actually trying to solve? What does that process look like? Where do tasks fit into that process? How do tasks work and fit into that process? And even down to the level of preference, right? Is there some kind of preference that, a team or individuals have, as to how they view and work with tasks inside of Podio? So, again, it doesn't have to be something that's totally, overthought, over-designed, as you're getting going or continuing your Podio adoption. But it is something to be armed with as you work with different teams within your organization to be able to help guide them to the best decision for them, again, as to whether or not to use the built-in native tasks within Podio or build a task application. So let's go ahead and pop over to Podio real quick, and we'll walk through some different examples, and some different kind of pros and cons and talking points of the native tasks in Podio versus a dedicated task application. All right, so starting with our native Podio tasks. If you've used Podio at all in the past, you're probably very familiar with the built-in task features. And tasks in Podio, at least in my opinion, they're more of individual reminders, right? They're kind of checklist, either done or not done. But some of the pros around these things is they're very easy to use. There's no additional setup. Obviously, these are native to the platform. They're there for a reason and a purpose. And they're very easy to use to get going, very easy to leverage, within the workflow engine. So again, I'm in the context of a project here. What I'm going to do, most of you probably know this, but if I want to create a native task in Podio, I just hit the letter T on my keyboard and I can start creating my task. So let's call this my task 1. I can assign this to myself. I can give it a due date. I can, make this shared or private. I can assign it a time. And I can even put in some notes here if I so choose. The other thing that is a little bit unique to the native tasks inside of Podio are these labels. So right now I've got 3 labels. These labels are unique to each individual user. Again, because the native tasks are built more for one-off reminders. This is something that is kind of a checklist item. It's done or not done, and it's unique to that user. These labels are also unique to the user. So sometimes the way I like to organize things, is in terms of what do I need to do right now versus maybe something I got to do this week versus it can be done sometime this month, right? So I can choose a label and create my task, and we see my task was added. Don't know why I got a refresh there, but anyway, we can now see my task is assigned here. I was in the context of my project 1, so my task was created here. Now again, if you're very familiar with the native tasks in Podio, I can come up here. I can view all of my tasks that have been assigned across any items in any workspace. I can sort those tasks by things like due date, by things like the application they reside in, the workspace they reside in, any number of things. But again, it's more of a checklist, just a reminder, is this thing done or is this thing not done, right? It's a very simple, simple use case. Now, tasks can also be created as part of a workflow. And this is where you get into some of the limitations and people start usually kind of steering towards maybe I should look at a specific app or a dedicated app for my tasks. And what I want to do is pop into the workflow engine and show you what I mean. So let's say, for example, I want to create a task when we hit project phase 1. A lot of times what will happen is folks will come in, they'll start a workflow. Let's say we want this when an item is updated. Let's do if project phase has changed. Project phase is phase 1. What they'll do is they will hard code these tasks into the workflow engine, which is not wrong. It's a very effective way, a very quick way to start automating the creation of some of these tasks. But this is, again, where you start to run into some limitations, potentially depending on your use case. So if your use case is, this is just a reminder that needs to be done by the same person every single time, that's something that this type of automation can handle no problem. So if this were something where it was like, every single time we get to phase 1, I need to create a task for DesignFlow support to, let's feed the dog. We want to make it right at that due date and that time. Very easy, no problem. Again, we can set this to private. We can put in some additional details. We can leverage tokens, from the project or from any referenced application that's tied to that project, just like we would in any other workflow. Now, here's where some of the limitation comes in. Let's say, for example, we want to get into things like, the due date for this task needs to be 5 weekdays from now, or maybe we want to track the status of this task, if it goes late, or maybe it's in another status or in a different progress stage, right? Those are things that just aren't built in to the native task engine in Podio. Again, it's either done or not done. So from that perspective, again, as you start to kind of stretch the use case, as you start to think about, is this task something that has a very specific and calculated due date? Is this task dependent on other tasks? Should this task get assigned to a team, instead of an individual or somebody within a team? That's where you start to kind of stretch the capabilities thin here of the native task application. But again, for those very simple one-off tasks where, when we hit this stage of this project, every single time this task needs to be done by this person, it's very effective to leverage those. Okay, so let's talk a little bit then about a task application. So what I've done here in this workspace is I've also created an app to house my tasks. And if I just come open one, you can see we've got a task name. Each task has a unique ID. Rather than done, not done, we've got not started, in progress, complete. We've got a due date and an owner. But again, this is where leveraging the power of the Podio applications really helps us potentially expand the use cases, of these tasks. So let's go ahead and talk about what that could look like here. I'm going to get out of that, and I'm going to go to projects. Let's say, for example, I want to create a task for this, just a one-off task, right? Now, this is very similar to what we would do with a native task in Podio. You might do it a little bit differently. You could create the task from the task application itself and manually tie it back to the project. Or you could do something like, test task 1. I'm going to make myself the owner, make today the due date, and I'm going to go ahead and create that task. So the workflow engine is going to go ahead and create that task for me. We see that task was created. It shows up in our table, and my fields now are able to be reused here. Again, should I need to create another new task. Now, a lot of people like, leveraging the native tasks because you kind of have this little checklist, down at the bottom. Some people like having the checklist, but they don't like having the checklist way down at the bottom. If you've got a lot of fields in your app, there's potentially a lot of scrolling if you're not leveraging, little navigation links and things like that. So what we did is we created just a little task summary table here where you can see, the related task name that we just created, its current status, the owner, and due date. So we can even pop over there. We can see here, our task. We can see it's not started. We can actually move this one to in progress. We can see the due date, and we can see the task is assigned to me. So if we go back to our project, we can see here now that our status went to in progress because we just changed it, and we've got that new task created. Okay, so now we can start, because we're using a task application, there's a lot more ability that's opened up via the workflow engine to help us in the way we create and modify those tasks. So again, this is probably one of the biggest differences between the native Podio tasks and using a task application is really in the flexibility that we have with what we can do with the workflow engine in terms of creating the task, updating certain fields in the task, building in task dependencies, so on and so forth. So what I've done is, let's go back out to our workspace here. So I've got my projects. Actually, this is where I wanted to be. Our projects, in this case, have 3 phases, 1, 2, and 3. But what I've done is I've created a scenario using the task application where maybe there's a standard set of tasks that get created by each phase. So maybe when we get to phase 1, there's a certain task. Phase 2, maybe there's certain tasks. Phase 3, so on and so forth. So what I'm able to do is not just hard code those into the workflow engine. I'm able to leverage yet another task application called task templates. And these templates are going to be what dictate the tasks that are created at each stage. So we can see here that task 1 is always going to be created when we get to a project phase 1. Task 2 always will be created at phase 2. Task 3 always created at phase 3. What I'll do is I'll come back to this in just a minute and show you some advantages of leveraging templates in this manner as it relates to the workflow. But let's come back over to our project. And let's say I want to, let's say we're good with task 1. Let's go mark that one complete. So task 1 is complete. Maybe that was a pre-flight thing to go feed the dog or do whatever. Let's go ahead and move ourselves to phase 1. And we can see here now task 1 was created as well. So if I go ahead and refresh, we can see task 1 is now related to my project here, and it was built off of the templates. So again, very easy to do. We've got those templates in place. All that's happening is our task application. If we go look at our task, maybe I broke something with my link there. If we go look at our task, we can see here that it looks very much like the template that we had created, because all it's doing is going and looking at our templates and saying, okay, at that phase, which tasks should be created? And then it's going ahead and creating those tasks here. So same thing, Let's go back and hit phase 2. So we see task 2 is created because we were at project phase 2. Our table's running a little bit behind there to update. There it goes. And we can see now both of those tasks have been created because we went through phases 1 and 2. Now, the reason I like doing this with a task application, and a task templates application, if these are standard tasks that happen the same way for every project, is in case we need to modify our tasks, right? So maybe this week, there's only one task for each phase, but maybe starting tomorrow, you know what, there's an extra task we need to do when we get to phase 3. So what I can do is, rather than come over to the workflow engine, go find that workflow and code that new task in, what I can do is come over to my task templates and say, all right, let's go ahead. I think I was calling them task 4. Let's tie that to phase 3. Let's make this do 10 days. There we go. So now what we have is we have one task being created in phase 1, one task being created in phase 2, 2 tasks being created in phase 3. And again, what that allows us to do, let's grab this one. This allows us, when we get to phase 3, to go look at our view of phase 3 tasks, and for each of those templates, go create a task in the task application. And again, because we're using a task application versus native tasks, there's a lot more we can do in terms of due date. So what we're doing is we're saying we want the due date to be, whatever that number of days, 10 days, but we want it to be 10 weekdays from the project creation date, or the creation date of I think the way I've got it in this one is the task. We can assign the owner, and we can update the project with those new tasks. So let's go ahead and go back to our project. Let's go ahead and move that to phase 3, and we should see both of those now get created. Task 3 and task 4. So now I have both of my tasks created in my task application. I can see those here from my project. But let's actually jump over to the task application itself. Again, some of this comes down to personal or team preference, but just like we've got our task layout for the native tasks here, because we're using the task application, we can slice and dice, the views and filters of these tasks however we want. So we can go create one that is, only our open tasks. Make that by status, or maybe we want that to be by owner since we already have one for status. We can decide which fields and columns we want shown here. Again, anything obviously that you can do with an application, through filtering, building views, building reports, can be done here. So what we can do, just like this task view is more set up to the individual, where you can see your tasks and you can see tasks you've delegated. What we can do, because we're using this task application, is we can create maybe a report or a widget to go out on the workspace homepage that's visible to everybody. So everybody knows all of the tasks that are open and where we're at with those. So we can do something like this. Actually, what I want to do is by owner. And let's go put that on our workspace homepage. And you can obviously rearrange these things and put those how you want. But now we can see, just like we could with our individual and delegated tasks using native tasks, now we can see all of the tasks, that are within that application or within that workspace, however we built that report here on our workspace homepage. So again, there's a lot of considerations. There's a lot of, it kind of depends on what you want to do when it comes to leveraging native tasks versus a task application. But again, I think the most important thing when trying to make that decision is just to kind of sit down and draw it out, and ask yourselves, what do I really need these tasks to accomplish? Who's going to be consuming these tasks? How do we look at these tasks, either individually or as a team? What are some of the complexities around task dependencies? Are these, standard tasks that are created at the same time, with the same, same type of owners? All those different questions usually will help guide you into, what way to design this, whether or not you use the native tasks or a task application. So hopefully you all find this video helpful. If you've got questions or thoughts, or you've been kind of wrestling with this, by all means, reach out, hit us up on the website, hit us up on social media, let us know, and we're happy to jump in and help you figure out what works best for you. Thanks, and have a great day.